Welcome, everyone. My name's Abby Chen, Senior Associate Curator at Asian Art Museum. Today's program is curated by Thuy Tran, the Curatorial Fellow of Contemporary Art made possible by the Asia Foundation's Margaret William Fellowship. I'd like to acknowledge that the Asian Art Museum sits on Ramaytush Ohlone land. Today, it is protected by the Ohlone tribe of the San Francisco Bay Area. We're full of gratitude for the Native American communities that have stewarded this land over the years and continue to do so. Welcome to the language of sampling, refusing dispossession. This event is part of the Asian Art Museum's Global Art Dialogue initiative to connect artists around the world. Today's event features artists Basel Abbas, Ruanne Abou-Rahme, and Zeina Barakeh from our exhibition After Hope, Videos of Resistance. They will be in conversation with Ufuoma Essi and moderated by Keisha Knight. Sampling is the language of the dispossessed. This statement by Basel and Ruanne was the inspirational seed for our conversation today. Sampling involves a process of extraction, layering, and looping that can mirror the disruption and fragmentation of marginalized and erased histories. In a recent interview I had with Hyperallergic, I said, we have to think how to transfer museums' sense of care for objects to the care of human beings and to the issues human beings are dealing with. At the time when Asian American community is scapegoated for the pandemic as our seniors, women are brutally killed and attacked. Our families and friends in Asia are under extreme suppression. All these points to the systematic violence. We at the Asian Art Museum condemn all forms of racism and xenophobia and violence amid this shifting social landscape. The museum's commitment to invest in emerging and established artists to expand the scope and nuance of what the continental Asia identity is, and our commitment to curate through a global lens of equity, justice, and collaboration is stronger now than ever before. Our artists today employ sampling to exert agency and the power in not only the reconstruction of historical narrative, but the assertion of everyday narrative of our lives, as if to say, we exist and we will continue to exist and thrive. And thank you for joining us and helping us to make space for today's conversation. A reminder that we're recording and that we will have an audience Q&A. Please add your questions to the Q&A box below. There will also be opportunity for engagement with the artists during the conversation. I'd like to thank our community partner, Sentient Art Film, founded by our moderator, Keisha Knight. Sentient Art Film is a creative distribution initiative providing opportunities for artists working outside of the mainstream. And last but absolutely not least, I'd like to thank Jheanelle Brown, who's been Thuy Tran's co-curator for this program. Jheanelle and Thuy met at Georgetown University, where they collaborated as student organizers on campus. Today, she's a board member and associate programmer of LA Film Forum and a faculty member at the California Institute of the Arts and Audis College of Art and Design. I'm grateful that the museum is able to connect with all these talents in this way and continue our collaboration across time and space. So off to you, Jheanelle.
Thanks, Abby. Thanks so much for all of your work. One, curating After Hope, which is a phenomenal exhibition of moving image work, and two, for just, helping us run stuff today. And also, Thuy unfortunately couldn't be here, but it's been a joy working with her to put together this program and think through some things that feel important and timely. So hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for spending this next little bit of time with us. My name is Jheanelle Brown. I'm coming to you from the ancestral lands of the Tonga people, also known as Los Angeles. And yeah, I'm just like really happy to have the opportunity to present an amazing group of artists, filmmakers, and thinkers. This program is part of the Asian Art Museum's Global Art Dialogue series. In thinking through this program, and Thuy and I just kind of started. We just wanted to put a program together, and we kind of really just started from scratch. But in thinking through what we could do, and the fact that this is, of course, being put on by the Asian Art Museum, we simply hoped that this program could be just a very small version, a very small intervention, a manifestation in some ways of solidarity, but also a rigorous conversation about moving image work, moving image practices, methodologies, and process. But I'm really excited because of, I think, the varied perspectives from the folks that you'll hear from in a bit. I'm really excited because this group, I think, represents folks at different varied stages of their careers, and I really find a lot of I find that to be very productive and very enriching, having conversations across kind of stages of people's careers. And also in terms of what I gestured to earlier, in terms of practice and framework and methodology. I think we have a representation of different kind of facets of moving image work, from Basel and Ruanne, who in very many ways are multidisciplinary with audio work, sonic work, and film and video installation work. Ufuoma as a filmmaker who very artfully works with analog formats and has a deep and rich archival and research-based practice. And Zeina, who brings a sort of tactility in these collage-based works in video. And of course, our moderator, Keisha, who's a film scholar, a distributor, doing some amazing and reparative work with a lot of care with sentient art film. And also, as Abby mentioned just a second ago, with the Asian Art Museums, I think expanding mandate to think expansively about identity. This is also, just very exciting for me to be able to present a program that are engaging with artists and filmmakers whose work is deeply rooted in their communities, that vary socioculturally and what have you, right? And that I feel like also speak to very important political themes. So now I'll introduce Keisha and let Keisha take it away. Keisha will tell us a little bit more about just the format of today's program, but we really are inviting your questions and your engagement. And so please, keep the chat and Q&A function active. As soon as we start, you can do it from now. And we'll be engaging with it as the program goes, and then we'll have a small a window for a kind of, I guess you could say, a formal Q&A. But again, we'll be taking questions and engaging with them as we go along. So I'm gonna read Keisha's bio and get us started. Keisha is the founder of Sentient Art Film and has spent the majority of her adult life between New York City and Asia. She is committed to deimperialization and the expansion of the collective imagination. Keisha passionately believes that the entire life cycle of a film, from conception to circulation, is a creative process that can expand or constrict what and how we imagine. Keisha's practice-based inquiry and theoretical explorations are aimed at understanding power structures embedded in and around cinema and art. And with that, Keisha, I'll let you take it away. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks so much, Jheanelle. I'm having a little bit of a sound issue. I keep glitching in and out. So if that happens, if someone could just let me know that you can't hear me, that would be great. So thank you. Thanks to Thuy, thanks to Abby, and thanks so much to everyone on the panel for coming today and making this space with us and all of our attendees. Like Jheanelle said, we really want to try to weave in our audience questions throughout the space of this panel, and we'll be showing different artists' works. Each of the artists will be showing a work, and we'll be talking through that. I will start with bios just so we know who is at the table, but while I'm introducing our artists to you, I'd like you all to think in the audience about this idea of sampling and what, just free association, what comes to mind. And it would be great if you could just drop it in the chat and we just start kind of our thoughts flowing together, because that's where we're going to start with the artists as well once I'm done reading these amazing bios. So yeah, sampling. Throw it in the chat. What comes up? What resonates? What do you think of music? Exactly. Just keep it coming for us as we start. So I'd like to start by introducing Zeina Barakeh. And Zeina is a Bay Area artist and Bay Area based artist whose work is rooted in her experiences of growing up in Beirut, and it deconstructs war. In 2020, her animation, Projections from the Third Half, Cloudstorm, was published in art journal Open. She has participated in numerous exhibitions and film festivals, including the Asian Art Museum, MoCA, Yinchuan, China, Newport Art Museum, Rhode Island, the Center for Book Arts, New York, San Jose Institute of Contemporary Art, Harlem International Film Festival, New York, Pulse, New York, Kino, Im Culture House, Berlin, and she's also an assistant dean of academic affairs at San Francisco Art Institute. So welcome, Zeina, thank you. And Zeina is joining us from the Bay Area today. And joining us from Palestine are Basel Abbas and Ruanne Abou-Rahme. And they work together across a range of sound, image, text, installation, and performance practices. Their practice is engaged in the intersections between performativity, political imaginaries, the body, and virtuality. Their approach has been largely one of sampling materials both existing and self-authored in the form of sound, image, text, and objects, and recasting them into altogether new scripts. The result is a practice that investigates the political, visceral, and material possibilities of sound, image, text, and sight, taking on the form of multimedia installations and live sound image performances. So welcome, Basel and Ruanne. Thank you so much. And joining us from London is Ufuoma Essi. And Ufuoma is a London-based video artist and filmmaker who works with film and moving image as well as photography and sound. And through explorations with the archive, she aims to interrogate and disrupt the silences and gaps of historical narratives. By using the archive as a process of unlearning and discovery, she seeks to recenter the marginalized histories of the Black Atlantic and specific histories of Black women. Essi's work also seeks to examine the historical and contemporary links between the Black Atlantic and explores intersectional themes of race, gender, class, and sexuality. So Ufuoma, thank you so much for joining us. So let's start with, we can look at, even some of the questions that came up in the chat, or the thank you for putting those through, everyone. But Basel and Ruanne, could you just give us some of your initial thoughts about sampling, since as Jheanelle mentioned, this idea of the language of the dispossessed really came from your work and your thoughts. So wondering if you could just start us off with how you think about this idea of sampling.
Should I start, Bassett, and then you see if you want to add something?
Sure, yeah, let's do that.
I think initially, Bassett comes from a music background, and I would say we were both very heavily involved in the electronic music scene in Palestine, where actually hip hop was very, very important. Some of the most, I think, important kind of political practices, artistic political practices to emerge from Palestine. This was maybe 15 years ago, was actually in the realm of music and hip hop. So that is, I think a large part of our practice in the way that we, took idea of like the sample, and also the whole history around sampling, how it emerges from actually as a sort of lack, not really having access to materials, not very often having access to your own archives, being sort of dispossessed from your own history, and then sort of, you know, creating something out of, you know, out of nothing, right? Out of like very sort of like disparate like materials. So I think that this was all sort of like a background for us about how we, you know, how we approached the archive when it comes to Palestine, right? How we approached images when it comes to Palestine, because the archive, for one, we don't have access to a lot of our archives, right? A lot of our archives were looted. A lot of parts of our material history have been taken. And even as we speak, it continues to be taken. So it's not something that just happened once, it's something that's continually happening. So for us, it was a question about how can we, you know, use the idea of the sample to sort of construct our own narratives that weren't bound within colonial sort of discourse and practice. So how can we use the sample to get out of that, and really being inspired by, yeah, by music practices. I mean, it's a lot to get into, but like that's a good, I don't want to go on for too long. I don't know, Bassett, if you want to add something.
Yeah, I mean, just that, I mean, when me and Ruanne first started working together, a big part of what sort of drew us was sort of problematizing this, you know, or what we thought was a repetition of images coming out of Palestine that almost made them lose a kind of potency. So we, when we first started working together, we didn't feel we were ready to pick up a camera, say, because we didn't feel we wanted to repeat the same images. And so that also led us to think about, you know, existing material. But then what happens when, as Ruanne said, your material, it doesn't exist. Like, so you're, you know, so you go on and start to think about how you can narrate using other material to simplify. Yeah, just wanted to add that.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. This idea of speculation and filling in the gaps, and also just, you know, maybe something we'll come back to as we keep speaking, is this idea of repetition and what that does and doesn't do. And I also just encourage the audience, as we're going to be talking a lot, so as things come up for you, please just drop your questions in the chat. We might not answer them immediately, but we will get around to them, and at least we'll have a lot of your voices in there. I'd like to actually ask the same question to Ufuoma, and then we'll go on to Zeina. And Zeina, we can then start with your showing of your work as a way of kind of taking this idea and discussion about sampling forward. So Ufuoma, I'm just wondering, I don't know if you think about sampling exactly in that under that heading, but I'm wondering how you do think about it, because you are also thinking about erasure and hitting gaps in the archive and histories that have been untold.
Yeah, I don't think before today I would have defined the way I use archive as sampling, but it really does relate and define a lot of aspects of how I use the archive as this place of like discovery and learning and kind of recentering certain histories that were deemed previously or even still peripheral. And so I'm interested in what is peripheral and bringing it to the forefront of our consciousness, but also of the work that I make, kind of taking images that were maybe not linked or not always as readily available images, and kind of how do I kind of weave that in to create new narratives out of existing work. So I'm interested in kind of reclaiming those images for oneself, most importantly. And so, yeah, I think the gaps within the archive kind of add to that kind of the lack of histories, but also I find it interesting kind of filling those gaps and kind of creating new narratives and kind of filling in the histories and recentering that for the viewer.
Thank you. And we'll get to see all of this in action very soon. Zeina, what your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts, actually, I haven't thought about sampling up until this panel, and it kind of came as a shock to me because I realized like my entire practice uses a lot of sampling with everything. I think more recycling for me. So right now, with all the questions that I'm thinking about for this panel, and some of the things have already been put in the chat, the quilting, the jumping, the shifting, the temporal shifting. So I see a lot of that already kind of in my work, and I think I am a little bit kind of trying to figure out how do they, like, for example, because I think of my own practice, I look at recycling, like how I recycle forms, and even concepts, and how is that different from sampling in terms of sampling, because I'm not well versed in music, so that wasn't a first thing that came to mind with me with sampling, but I'm very happy to discover that that term, because it opens up, it broadens the conversation a lot more. And then I can see it also with I think we're all going to see it with the works that are going to be presented today. I'm going to stop here. I think I'm going to jump in and show some of some of my work. So just to introduce a little bit, I'm going to show two bodies of work today. The first one is a video. It's titled Projections from the Third Half, Cloud Storm. So this video has been done in 2020. I'm going to show an excerpt of 2 minutes, but I just sort of want to explain the way I made this video. I have produced it using stills from two previous stop motion animations that I've already completed. The first one is called Homeland Insecurity, that I've done in 2016. And the other one is called Slam Bang Blue, which I've completed in 2018. So what I did is I combined stills from those two previous animations to kind of produce a new aesthetic and a new narrative. So I'm going to show you that. Okay. So here I also want to give a sense of how from one of the two animations that I mentioned. This is from the animation Slam Bang Blue. I just wanted to give a sense of the characters that you see in the video Cloudstorm that you just saw. So here you have the main characters, the centaur, which is the colonizer, and the horse, which is my own avatar with the horse head as a colonized subject. And this image has sort of, or these characters have kind of been generated from this image for me. This image is an archival image that represents a demonstration in central Jaffa Square in 1933. And here you have the Arabs demonstrating against the British government. And you can see in the image the blurring, the British mounted soldiers, they look like centaur to me. So this is where the idea of the centaur as the colonizer has become a main character in all my animations. So I just sort of wanted to trace the history to that event that has been very key to most of my animations, basically. And then I also want to introduce another body of work, which is Holy Land. So it's a set of prints, and you can see the same aesthetics. It also combines stills from the two animations that I've already talked about, Slam Bang Blue and Homeland Insecurity, but I've juxtaposed passages from the Department of Defense's Law of War Manual. So this is one example of the prints. It's about prohibited weapons. Here is another one, but I'm going to go straight to the text so that you can read a little bit. So this one is about the limitations on the power of the occupying power stemming from its lack of sovereignty over occupied territory. So I'm just going to leave it for a little bit so that the audience can read.
And Zeina, where does the text come from again?
The Department of Defense's law, the U.S. Department of Defense's Law of War Manual. So belligerent occupation in a foreign war being based upon the possession of enemy territory necessarily implies that the sovereignty of the occupied territory is not vested in the occupying power. Occupation is essentially provisional because sovereignty is not vested in the occupying power. The fact of military occupation does not authorize the occupying power to take certain actions. For example, the occupying power is not authorized by the fact of belligerent occupation to annex occupied territory or to create a new state. Here is another text. It addresses proportionality in war, how, it's supposed to use economy of force, not excessive, not unreasonable. And then, as you can see, these are like very gray zone kind of controversial definitions with how they're applied. There's also about proportionality in war. There is distinction between civilians and armed forces. There is some reference to honor, the human treatment of detainees, and informing of reasons for detention. So I juxtapose these passages against these prints. So I'm going to stop sharing and get back to that. When I played the video, I wasn't sure because I disappeared. I couldn't tell if the video was like, if the audience could see the video. So
yeah, no, thank you for that. Yeah, exactly. The use of this piece, as Jheanelle mentioned in the chat, another layer of sampling. I was going to actually ask you about that. Unless there are any questions that come through from our other panelists or the audience, I was going to ask you, Zeina, what for you, for the still image and the moving image and bringing this other layer of text in terms of like sampling actually from an official document, what made you feel like you wanted to kind of put that stamp on it and also include it in this kind of almost, illuminated manuscript or, font that you chose. Could you speak a little bit about that, particularly thinking about the kind of trauma that you're thinking through and working through in your work?
Yeah, thanks, Keisha. Well, for these two projects, they use the same aesthetic, but one obviously is a video, is time-based. So I go back to a certain point in history. I consider, first of all, my animations, they're all a series, like different chapters, one after the other. There's continuity with them. There's always the same characters playing, and they're always based on the colonizer and colonized. So I sample from history. I use a particular event to develop a set of animations with it. And I activated that event. There's another animation that I did not show here. It's called Scenarios of Return, and in which I insert myself as a giant in central Jaffa Square, and I fight the British Mandate soldier with the idea of reversing history and presenting a counter narrative. So the time-based functions as a live as an event that's constantly unfolding. And in the video projections of the third half, I'm also manufacturing history on some level, because with the way I made the animation, I'm using sets of stills from two previous narratives of war that I depicted in the previous animations. So let's say I have 1,000 images in one animation and 1,000 in another. If I combine stills a bit from like a series from A to B from those two animations, I'm going to get one plot. If I combine two other samples from the two other animations, I'm going to get another plot, and so on. So basically, I can create an infinite number of narratives unfolding with that video, the projection of the third half. So I have different iterations of it. Like Cloud Storm is only one plot. Now with the other work, Holy Land, so this is kind of functions as a historical document, as a policy document. It's fixed because it's a still, it's printed. And it's meant to be deceiving. And I sample also from a policy document. So I pick specific definitions and I juxtapose them next to these pretty looking images. And there's a certain deception with that, because you think, oh, these are colorful, they're pretty. And then you look closer, then you see the text is actually very dry text. It's policy, it's law, and it's the law that facilitates the colonizer's power. It's the law that the laws that the imperialist power uses to oppress the colonized. And then, of course, the imagery, the aesthetic, it's all very fragmented. So it's meant to look pretty, and then when you come closer to it, you kind of see the fine print of war, how these things shift, how the colonizer uses these methods to impose their doctrines. So one functions as a set already accepted fact, the historical print, versus the continuous unfolding of the power of the colonizer.
Yeah, amazing, Zeina. Thank you so much. We've been getting some thoughts in the chat. And so before we move on to Basel and Ruanne, I'd like to just pose the question that came up from Anna, who wrote, I find a surprising softness, femininity, and a harshness in the atmosphere you create. This is very appealing. Can you talk about that and if it was intentional? I think you were getting at that a bit before with the idea of the juxtaposition of this beauty and this dryness, but is there anything else you want to draw out of that based on this question, Zeina?
I think it's meant to be seductive, because history, it's told by the powerful, by the dominant narrative, and so I try to employ the countermeasures as much as possible, like with my work. And yeah, so in this sense, yeah, there is a softness and femininity and colorful, and then, you know, it's not that. Even with the video, it's very camouflaged and very fragmented, because you don't understand anything anymore. You think you do, or you're getting the information coming from the dominant perspective, the colonizer's perspective. You know, there's a lot of reduction, there's a lot of fragmentary information, distortions, disruptions, erasures that happen within how the narrative is being told.
Absolutely, which is actually an incredible segue into Ruanne and Basel. Thank you so much for that dip into your world, Zeina, and your answers. And Ruanne and Basel, this notion that you were talking about before, and that Zeina just brought up about fragmentation and, you know, the rupture. I'm wondering if maybe that's a way to lead into your work, or if you want to kind of give us a brief intro in any way that you feel before sharing.
To the work that we're showing now?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I mean, fragmentation in general is something that we have been dealing with, and I think also fragmentation of the visual field. And I think you'll see that in this work, Only the Beloved Keeps Our Secrets. And that also really comes from the way that colonization actually colonizes your visual field. So quite literally in Palestine, you know, different towns and cities and villages are closed off by these military walls. So there is actually a physical limit to the lines of visibility. And so this work deals a lot with that, and tries to think about that in relation, of course, to memory and narrative and history, but also just this idea of constant erasure and constant testament in the way that images and text come together, and also the images cover each other. So there is this kind of way that you're not ever really seeing the full image. But another important aspect of this piece is that it's centered around Israeli military CCTV footage of the killing of a young boy who was 14 years old, named Yusuf Shawarme, who was going to pick a Palestinian delicacy. It's a plant called akub that the Israelis have decided is illegal for Palestinians to forage. And he was ambushed and killed in 2014. And they were forced to release the CCTV footage that was then uploaded online. It was then later taken down by court injunction, but we have it. So it's also part of what we do. We're constantly collecting material. And so that's a very, just to give that, I think we can talk more about, but that's a very important aspect of the piece. So go ahead, Basel.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, let's have a look. Again, please. Thank you, Basel and Ruanne. I'd like to actually start us off with a question. And again, I'll just encourage the panelists in the audience to, jump in whenever you have a question that comes to mind. But I'd just like to start off because, Ruanne, the first time I watched that piece, I didn't have the context that you just gave. And I could infer, I could speculate about what I thought happened, particularly in the CCTV footage, but I didn't know for sure. And I'm wondering, just as this work circulates, how important it is for you, the context, and that it's presented with that full context, or even perhaps more complete context than what you just shared, or if it's something that you think can stand without that context.
Should I do it, Basel? Do you want to answer? Actually,
Yes,
I think there's some gunshots here. I'm in Jerusalem and I'm hearing some gunshots. Sorry, it's a bit distracting. I don't know what's going on. Basel, do you want to answer that, or?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that it is quite important in terms of this is a single person's story. It's a collective story of a people, but it is also this person's specific story, and that is circulated here. Like it's a known story because it's connected to the foraging and the fact that this mountain, you could actually go and forage there before, and they had kind of newly erected the fence. So this child or this family had always gone to that mountain to forage aku, and it only grows like 2 months in the year. And obviously this is the family's livelihood. So they don't just do it to eat, but they do it to sell in the markets and things like that. So we obviously try to always include that text with every time we show the work. But it's also, we always sort of, we always are very careful not to ghettoize Palestine as an issue as well. And so our practice always has always has Palestine in it, and this is the point of a starting point for us. This is something we like live day to day and feel on our skin, and so we have this urge and need to keep talking or thinking about it. However, we insist on reading the world from Palestine, and so everything is always in relation to other forms of oppression, other forms of struggle happening elsewhere. So this line between sort of specificity of, and then the communal Palestinian, but then also worldwide where other oppressed peoples can relate, is kind of a politics that we have, and that kind of comes in our work. I think it shows. I'm not sure that answers the question, but that's where my thoughts went.
Yeah, it seems like a very, it seems like something that always needs to be negotiated. And it's what I hear in your response, as Jheanelle put it in the chat, this balance, and just particularly with exhibition. And you were saying at the beginning earlier, Basel, that part of your work is also responding to this repetition of images of Palestine that I think served toward a certain ghettoization or you know, just making a monolith of something. And I'm actually wondering, it kind of goes to Jackie's question in the chat about the selection of the music and the images, you know, how you're kind of, I don't know if you want to just tell us a little bit about your process in terms of not reinscribing those repetitive stereotypes, but also addressing, being specific.
Yeah, I'll just jump in, and then Ruanne will probably add more, but just to say that like the way we actually work formally is we don't actually do sound to video, we do sound to text. So we work on sound before we film. And so the sound is really informed by the text. So most of the time we start with text, we sample text. That could be, you know, fragments of text that we weave together, and then also our own text that we write. So we sample our own text and weave it in with other texts. And text is our starting point 90% of the time when we work on a video or sound work. And then we work on the sound conceptually, and we try to like have the sound independently or on its own be able to kind of relay what we're saying with the text. And then the sound is informing things like color, it's informing things like rhythm, camera movements. And of course, we then go back and forth when we're editing video. We obviously go back so that the sound is kind of more like a rough sort of bed of sound that we create that kind of informs the mood. And then there was another part to the question, I think. I don't remember that part.
I think, go ahead, Ron, please.
No, I just wanted to jump in and say that specifically in this work, the text is all from songs, sort of popular songs. So it's like micro fragments from that, because we were, you know, thinking about the relationship to land and, you know, all the sort of layers of erasure, but the ways in which also people resist that erasure. And part of what we have been thinking about for a while and what we're still working on is the ways in which song and performance become a very important site to kind of claim space, to claim oneself. So part of what you saw was a kind of street wedding in Jerusalem. And so those kind of rituals become really, really significant for us. And then I just wanted to add that the way we work is also through improvisation. So we actually, after we work on the text, we tend to work in a very live way with sound and video. So we use live softwares, and then we kind of improvise together. So yeah, the sound, as Basel was saying, how we conjure is that the sound comes first, and then we start to sort of you know, weave the rhythm. I think rhythm is a very important part of that. So sorry, just I'll stop there.
No, this is really really interesting. I actually have one more question. I think we'll come back to Kathy's question at the other side at the very end. But there's an invocation quality to the way that text is used in this piece. And I'm wondering if you actually see, you use the words conjuring and this kind of claiming. And so I'm wondering if you actually see this video and the circulation of it as also some kind of invocation or claiming, or I don't know, there was, Basel, you mentioned the idea of, you know, coming from a place of Palestine, but also being in solidarity with other movements and other types of oppression. So I'm just wondering about the like invocation or even like ritualistic quality of the way the text is used. If maybe you could speak to how that kind of, what you're trying to conjure.
Yeah, I think definitely ritual and sort of conjuring and a you know, sort of aspect in that of things that are, you know, beyond our, you know, also beyond language. So it's kind of strange. It's kind of like using language to get to something that's beyond language in a way. And also the conjuring is about just our relationship to time, you know, this sense of like very deep time. And also when you come from somewhere like Palestine, it's sort of burdened by that, right? So we have some of the first Neolithic sites, you know, on Earth, but also it's a way of like, how can you not be burdened by it, but sort of use it like to kind of subvert. And yeah, the conjuring for us is always like, how can we become unbound from the systems that are binding us and oppressing us and dispossessing us? And in that way, it's extremely important how we try to intersect with other sites of struggle, because I feel that we also feel it very deeply. It's not like, oh, we're conceptually trying. It's like we feel deeply how much our experiences are intersecting with other experiences of dispossession, and how significant it is for us to bring these sites of like struggle and resistance to each other. And so, yeah, I mean, the way that the video circulates and our work circulates, we're always thinking about how it can also activate certain things, right? Which is always a challenge, but you know.
No, that's great. Thank you. I think we'll. I just want to make sure we have time for Ufuoma's work, and then we can circle back around. I'd love for Zeina and Basel, Ruanne, and Ufuoma. Kathy put a question in the chat that maybe we can circle back around to at the very end and get all of your takes on. But I think, Ufuoma, let's move on to your work. Well, Ufuoma, I have a very simple question. I don't know if it's simple, but it's formal. So it's not as much about. Well, when I was watching your piece, this piece, and also Basel and Ruanne's piece, I noticed this similar strategy of, I don't know if we'd call it masking or putting blocks of either text or color or image over image. And I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit to that technique and how it might resonate with different things that we've been talking about so far.
Yeah, so yeah, this film was made in 2019, and essentially the film is exploring Black women's kind of collective experience of history, music, and the kind of the act of reclaiming history or the act of reclamation. And so it really initially it kind of started off with text, and then it was the kind of looking at the archive research, going through lots of footage, going through lots of video work. And so when I was kind of creating this new narratives out of these existing images, these videos, I was really interested in kind of creating this background and foreground of the piece. So there are I mean, it's 15 minutes long, but there are parts of the film that are quieter and a bit more building up to kind of a rhythm of tension points in the film. And so I use the kind of an image within an image to kind of create a bit more depth for the viewer to on screen, but also as a way of kind of like inserting specific images at the forefront when I want them to be as an act of, as a reminder to the viewer. And also I use repetition to kind of cut in and out of parts of the film as this kind of constant reminder of the processes of history as this kind of constant force, going back and in and out of specific histories or narratives, or the way we even think about memory. So yeah, I use it in a way to kind of create space, but also to kind of really cement certain images to the forefront for the viewer.
Yeah, that brings again, I don't know, panelists, if you want to jump in too, please feel free. There just seems like there's a lot of resonance between, you know, all of these works. So I feel like you might have pressing questions you want to ask each other. I was gonna kind of piggybacking, Ufuoma, on that last thing you said about creating space, but also solidifying. You know, it's one of the questions I have about this process of refusal, but also presentation, right? Or the kind of the idea of, you know, bringing something back, but also not wanting to make it so transparent that it can be evacuated of meaning. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to a little bit about that tension, particularly in this work, the idea of, you know, wanting to, you know, I guess I'm wondering if it's a process of recovery, or if it's a process of kind of like keeping the cracks, just showing that they're there, or if that shifts as you go about making a piece.
Yeah, so I think I would describe it maybe, yeah, similar to what you said, maybe an act of recentering certain histories or recentering certain images. And so within the film, there were images that I really wanted to use and that I wanted to kind of be the forefront for the film. And so specifically, Abbey Lincoln was a major influence on my practice, but also the film. And so there were parts of the film where I was like, I needed to kind of create space, and so building up to certain points of the film that I wanted to really just have the space to kind of for the viewers to take that in, essentially. And so yeah, so so at different parts of the film, it's a bit slower, the pace is slower, the images kind of contrast, but it's also, they also act, there's images where it's kind of guess of cars or streets, they kind of build up to the scenes where we do see images of people having fun in a domestic setting, or the women talking, or these just images that kind of remind the viewer constantly of how history works and how images kind of are held or kept or kind of pushed aside. And images also act as sites of surrogation to kind of larger themes specifically. And so there was a specific kind of politics that I wanted to kind of be part of the film, specifically around Black female soul singing. And so those images, the times where there were breaks in between, are really important to kind of give space to the other images that would follow.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I'm wondering, I want to get back to Kathy's question. Before we do, I just wanted to open it up to our panelists to, do you have any questions that have, now that you've seen each other's work in real time again, maybe for the first or second time, I'm wondering if there are any questions that have come up for you for each other.
Maybe I have a question. I mean, the works, I see a lot of connections between our works. I mean, maybe formally more Ruanne and Basel with Ufuoma, but also I'm considering the text, how we use it, like in our respective works, Ruanne and Basel and me, the juxtaposition, like in their works, it's English and Arabic. In my works, it's English, but also maybe the figures have a bit of a calligraphic sense to them, or at least somebody once said that to me. Maybe it wasn't intentional, but I thought about that. But I feel like I want to ask them, is with the text, is there a certain hanging on to language, to kind of history, policy, with the works? Because I've also seen this similarity with my work with other Palestinian artists, where they also use a lot of text. I mean, in their case, Basel and Ruanne, you start with the text maybe, but do you have any thoughts about that?
I don't think, yeah, I think poetry is a big part of our practice. I used to write a lot. Now I feel like I write in the context of these works. But also, you know, the oral tradition is very important in Palestine. Actually, the oral tradition in terms of oral poetry and the way that that went into music is very significant. And that's also the space in which people used to keep certain forms of memory, right? So it's a very important site of lived memory and lived history that resists also kind of the colonial narratives that, or the official history. So we never really look towards, Bessa and I have never used official materials. We're always interested in how people themselves are making space and sort of claiming space and claiming themselves and claiming their stories. So oral history and poetry has always been a big side of, inspiration for us and a way for us to think through. So maybe that kind of answers. I don't know if Basil, you want to add? No. Okay. Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, I'm not sure if you would like to add anything to that. I don't know if you have any thoughts about.
Sorry, could you just repeat the question? Sorry.
Well, it's a question about how text is being used, and you know, you actually do use text also in this piece, but in a, I would consider the time code a kind of text, and then we also have the signage that's within the frame. So I'm wondering if that's a layer that you're also actively working with in terms of working through the archive and history and memory.
Yeah, so I think I don't directly, I guess, use text in the work in the same way as everyone else probably, but the work is always kind of either influenced by a specific Black feminist text, or it then is inspired by it. And so the text, sometimes the work kind of really starts with the text, and then that's what kind of guides my research through the archive. And so, yeah, I think it maybe I use text in a way to kind of guide my research, and then that informs the film. And so a lot of my texts have been looking at Black performance history, and so that's what I'm interested in, kind of looking at images and looking at how they relate to specific kind of politics, but also specific moments in our history that were kind of really act as sites of segregation to that. And so the text really informs how I even approach the archive, I would say.
Interesting. Yeah, I am actually kind of keeping with this idea of research and text. I actually want to, we have time for about one more question because I'd like to hear from everyone. So I'm going to try to synthesize two-ish questions that we have in the chat. The first one, which Kathy dropped in a while ago, about, you know, thinking, both of the questions are kind of thinking about the CCTV footage and kind of traditional history versus oral history, and the idea of combining this, kind of the different types of reliability. So Kathy says, in traditional history, image and text are often positioned as in opposition. Text is reliable, whereas creative practice, memory, oral history is subjective. And so we were just talking a little bit about that and kind of how that works into your practice. And then Jackie mentioned here the question about the dispossession and marginalization, and that the idea that perhaps the majority of images we pass down based on current dominant archival practices will actually be from dispossessed, marginalized images. And how does this impact your practice? And finally, sampling is also a battleground of agency, and who's claiming it and who's reclaiming it. So any of those things for a final thought, or even if there's something else that you want to offer as we kind of round out our hour and a half here, which just flew. Anyone who's feeling moved can start. I won't call on you.
Maybe I'll answer.
No, I was gonna say, yeah, go for it, please.
Or does anyone else? I just saw no one was moving. No one else. Basel, no. Maybe I can combine the two actually. I mean, for me, I think a large part of actually what we're all doing is sort of, refusing this idea that, this kind of opposition between sort of like official recorded histories that are obviously always recorded by those in power as the site of kind of fact and truth, and it's methodological, it's and everything else that comes from people's experiences, from people's stories, from people's songs, are just this kind of subjective field of feelings and fictions. It actually for us, we're very much working on the like affective field. So actually feelings are very important. And at the same time, for us, what's officially documented is actually a bunch of untruths, right? I mean, for many of us, it's a history of lies and oppression and erasure. And actually the only way to subvert it is to insist on the importance of this sort of living history, whether it's with people or we can find it in the land itself. So there's all kinds of layers of like living history that are there, and we just need to listen to them. So I think for us, in all our work, it's really about insisting on the importance of that and using that as a way to not just resist erasure, but really like generate other possibilities. And then to answer the other question, this was actually the first time we ever used something like an official sort of CCTV footage, or we usually don't use that kind of material. And a lot of the other material that you saw was, moments of creation and song and joy. And so that's why it was very important for us to think about, those sort of ways that people are generating that space. But at the same time, we can't just look away from, right? So it's this kind of way of balancing actually dealing with what's happening materially on the ground, which is very violent and very traumatic. So not turning away from it entirely and just creating something, but finding a way to deal with it whilst creating a different type of language and a different type of image. So yeah, that's it. I answered both, very long.
Thank you so much, Ron. That was incredible. Ufuoma?
I think so. Working with found footage or appropriated footage, I think there's always kind of you're always looking to kind of create new works from it. And so definitely reclaiming images is central to that, and how you look at old images and existing images and how you reframe it in a current, I guess, political context, and what do those images mean. And so, yeah, I think sampling is definitely a way of reclaiming histories, but also images that were maybe lost or maybe not as easily available as they were previously, but it's also a way of redressing certain kind of historical inaccuracies that you want to kind of set right, or you want to just kind of provide an alternative way of looking at it. And I think sampling gives you that kind of new lens to kind of look at old images and see how, see what you can create from those existing images. And yeah.
For me, Keisha, I mean, I'm thinking about Kathy's words and also other things that have come up. I mean, the term subjective, I think by definition, the sampling has to be also subjective, because, yeah, you're picking from a dominant narrative and you're altering it to resist it, to reveal a certain truth that has not been told, or a certain distortion, or a certain reversing the erasure in a way, if that works. So it has to be subjective. It's the only way for it to have that dialogue with the dominant. It has to be subjective to be powerful. And I think with all our works, there was a lot of repetition, like repetition with imagery, with Ufuoma, the repetition with the bounding boxes that are on top of each other, repetition of the sounds in Basel and Ruanne's work. And I think for me, the repetition is very key in the works that I've seen today, because the repetition also in itself reveals a certain persistence and a certain resilience. It's kind of like you have to say the same thing 10 times to kind of eliminate the dominant, to impose your own message. I mean, it's not necessarily your own message, but kind of to kind of make it a point. And it's in a way, with every repetition, you're recounting a certain oppression, or different forms of it, because also oppression happens not in one form. Dispossession doesn't happen in one form, not only with the land and with rights and with resources. It applies and it functions in so many different contexts. And that's why I think the repetition, you take one element and you sort of repeat it, and as a way to resist kind of that dialogue. I think those are those are my thoughts from some of the terms that have been put in the chat. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know we only have 4 minutes, but I would like to, Basel, do you want to just give us do you have anything to add? It would be lovely to hear your voice again before we sign off here.
No, there's so much to actually think about, and yeah, just so many things. I mean, I was thinking a lot about this sort of kind of reclaiming one's image, or you know, and how we kind of think about that in our practice. And I think a lot of sort of like art practices in general are sort of always catering towards like markets, or catering towards a kind of a Western audience. And so they almost sort of fall into like an ABC sort of introduction of like the history of Palestine, or the, you know, because you want to sort of tell people what's going on. And we sort of really tried to focus on like actually speaking to Palestinians as well, like as a sort of primary audience. And I think that allowed us to really think about what kind of image does, you know, what kind of image does how does a Palestinian see themselves as well, and that that thinking at least features heavily in our practice. Maybe it doesn't come out formally, but that's definitely something. So that's just something I've been thinking about in the last 2 minutes now.
Thank you so much. And we've got 2 minutes to spare, Jheanelle and Abby. So thank you for letting us kind of push it to the very end, but this is an incredible conversation. I will say, I think, Deb, if you could, for everyone who's here, if your friends weren't able to join, we're going to have this up on the YouTube page of the Asian Art Museum, so you can find it there archived if you want to go back and have a look. And that's it. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Incredible, incredible conversations, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Really, I'll just have a quick concluding remarks. But I mean that, yeah, thank you. Thank you. This was a phenomenal discussion. Award for most interactive and engaged audience goes to our audience. Y'all did it. I really appreciate y'all. So much in the chat. And you know, just to that end, you know, I really appreciate there was a comment about kind of like the traumatic aspects of a lot of imagery that's propagated, especially by dominant narratives and dominant archival practices and even news and media. And so I really appreciate, I think there's, and what I've kind of like thought through listening to this conversation, in the ways in which the dynamism of each of your particular visual vernaculars really kind of like breaks up the spectacularization of some of the, you know, some of these things that you all might be gesturing to or engaging with, but from, I think, taking agency of you all's relationship to it, your lived experiences, and also the rigor of your practices. I really feel like, you know, there's ways in which violence is spectacularized, and that also propagates a narrative and, you know, further maybe dispossesses us from our lived experiences. But I really appreciate the ways in which you all, where your work breaks up that spectacularization in the frame is what I'm saying specifically. The richness in the frame, the tactility, even if we don't get to have that dimensionality because of how we're, you know, because of the work and the discipline and the mediums. So yeah, I mean, I feel like even though I co-organized this, I also just like learned a lot more, and I really appreciate you all's generosity in terms of letting us kind of take a deep dive in your process and your practice. And Keisha, thank you so much for your deft moderation. I feel like I learned a lot from you as well. And thank you also to Abby and Deb for helping us put this together and being behind the scenes. So again, thank you to Zeina, Ufuoma, Ruanne, Basel, and Keisha. Thank you so much. And thank you again to the Asian Art Museum, Thuy, Deb, Abby, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
It's our honor to have all these wonderful artists present. And I just really wish to welcome all of you to come to the museum to see your own work and in the company of others. I know it's a very different kind of time, but really wish you all can come to see the show. And just, you know, to all the artists there, the gallery is intentionally not dimmed all the way to total darkness like a cinema. That draws the audience into the environment the video creates. Instead, the audience is made very aware of their own presence when navigating what's in motion and what's being acted upon. So just want to share a little note of that. And yeah, it's such a pleasure to be in the company of you all.
Thank you so much, Abby, Jheanelle, Keisha, Deb, and it was a pleasure to meet Ufuoma, Ruanne, and Basel. I hope we cross again at other panels or conversations. It was really wonderful to have this conversation. Thank you.
You all.
Thank you.
Thanks,
all.
everyone. Stay safe.